Yeah.
That's what we call people who don't play video games. Limited people.
Welcome to NOCLIP. I'm Chad Ruthermond.
I'm JJ Artemis.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about What Remains of Edith Finch, which was developed by Giant Sparrow and was released on Microsoft Windows, the PlayStation 4, and Xbox One in 2017. What Remains of Edith Finch is a walking simulator, because I think we've just embraced the term at this point.
Yeah.
Where they sort of attempt to inject all of these, other game-y elements into it. It's pretty uncommon that it's, something that requires any level of, dexterity, but it does, they do want to sort of make an effort to make the game a little more video gamey than the majority of walking simulators.
See, I kind of think the exact opposite. I feel like a lot of walking simulators feel the need to gamify the game by putting in puzzles or some kind of weird first-person platformy section, or maybe it's just that we've played a bunch of weird ones, the two of us. But this largely relies on interactive set pieces that you can't really lose,
right?
Or they don't hold you up from progressing through the narrative. They're all kind of in service of the story. And I think that's part of what makes it such a good walking simulator.
So, what you've given me just now are all objective facts, and so I don't disagree with you. That would be a misstep on my part to claim that I do. But I think what the angle that I'm looking at this as is how you look at JRPGs, where a JRPG is assumed to have this baseline mechanic, and then games build up on it in different ways. I think that the baseline walking simulator is something like The Graveyard, or what's the one on the coast? Dear Esther.
Yeah.
Yes. Where the entirety of your interaction is just moving from point A to point B, and then the credits roll. Whereas modern walking simulators, as well as some of the earliest games that would maybe be classified as it today but weren't at the time because it just didn't exist, take the baseline, go to from point A to point B, and then they put things on top of it. And I feel like this game, because it compartmentalizes everything, that's sort of where I was getting at. Because I in no way want to imply this game has mini games in it, because that's it has one mini game, and that is all.
It has vignettes. It's a game that attempts to use different types of mechanical interaction to evoke the specific types of feeling in each of the scenes of the game. And as you said, the scenes are very distinct. So you can move through these kind of free-form psychedelic scenes and instead progress to something a little bit more intended to be restrictive and make yourself feel like you're in the same kind of oppressive situations as the characters. Probably my favorite out of all of them might be the whimsical baby jumping. I don't really know what you call it. Baby jumping is the closest I can really get, even though it's technically not the baby that is jumping.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. I really like that early observation, because it suggests that, like other genres, walking simulators have to fight to differentiate themselves mechanically, which is kind of a weird thing that you wouldn't necessarily think walking simulators would feel pressured to do.
Right.
Yeah, I guess, in the end, we're all still game developers, and we all still have cute little 3D tricks that you want to incorporate.
Yep. And I also think they're largely, if not all, made by indie studios. And I feel like there's probably a lack of confidence where they feel like
Final Fantasy 13.
Ha. Zing.
Got him.
With the exception of Final Fantasy 13, they're basically all made by indie studios who probably feel like they need to add in more substantial gameplay, like they're insecure about the quality of their game where you just walk.
Wait, did I? I'm sorry. Huge pause. Did I miss the 2010, if not earlier, era meme that was Final Fantasy 13 as a walking simulator?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, people have referred to it as Final Hallway 13 because all you do is walk forward and fight enemies.
I knew about that, but the further step of making it a walking simulator is so perfect that I'm sad that I missed that cultural moment by a literal decade.
Yeah, our comedy is edgy and on the border, on the fringes of human consciousness. Eventually, they will look back on us as prophets of the future.
Edgy as in on the edge of human consciousness.
Yeah.
No, edgy as in on the edge of humor. Almost humor.
So many edges.
I know. Anyway.
We are the barest edge of memory. We are the barest edge of comedy.
So yes, I agree with that, and I agree especially with the idea of that being seen as the different compartmentalized sections of this game being seen as vignettes, because their primary function is to shift tone, and if not tone, just perspective, so that you're not taking the story in entirely from one frame of reference. Mm-hmm. And I think they're largely successful at that. I think that this is a really interesting and good way to... It's definitely not the first game that has done multiple... We just talked about Eternal Darkness, which does functionally the same thing. Mm-hmm. But obviously their goals are incredibly different.
Oh yeah, Eternal Darkness was trying to force multiple diverse perspectives on the same linear narrative over a huge timescale. This is not really that game. I mean, one of the most confusing things about this game to me is how, in a lot of ways, it kind of doesn't have an obvious narrative through line or point. I say that with huge air quotes on the side, because when I say point, I don't mean oh, it's a walking simulator, what do you do?
What's even the point?
I mean, it doesn't even seem to have a strong central narrative thrust, unless I'm a stupid baby person.
You're not.
Thank you, Chad.
But this is kind of this was the overarching thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into the meat of the game itself. Mm-hmm. The concept of this game is just a concept of human suffering and despair, which obviously means that I love it, because it mirrors the sort of
suffering and despair that you feel.
The kind of movies and shit that I like, where it's there's no happy ending here. It's just everyone dies, and then at the end it's revealed that also you died.
Okay, I want to caution you here, because people are going to hear this and think that what the movies that you're referring to that you're into are French high cinema about the fruitlessness of man, when in actuality it's both that and terrible horror movies in which people are ripped apart indiscriminately.
Well, I feel like that's not true at all. This is nothing in tone like those kinds of movies.
It super isn't, but it is the messy, because it's not the same. It's not the same tone. Well, I think that your characterization of things that I like is pretty good, all things considered. Even most horror movies have an uplifting ending, or at least somebody gets away at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, the previously mentioned French auteur film is the thing more that I'm talking about, where it's something that, whereas that game focuses more on the despair and the inevitability of death, this thing focuses more on life, right? It has an uplifting message, even if everything that's presented to you is misery.
It feels more of a personal story, because it's about one family as well, and not mankind is doomed or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not that this game has the same tone of these kind of oppressive defeatist works. It has the same topic. Mm-hmm. It's still talking about how life deeply sucks in horrible ways, but it has a different takeaway and a different approach to that that can often just be straight up whimsical at times.
Right.
It really wants you to revel in the uselessness of your every moment. Which sounds insufferable, right? as a description, I can understand why people might, listening to this, hear about this game and be like, "Oh my god, it's got its head so far up its own ass. It's got to be blinking organs or whatever."
Right.
When you blink at something, is it blinking it? Whatever. I'll clarify this later. But
That seems like the right term.
indeed, but I think this game, it's shockingly not heavy-handed in those themes. It is a very down-to-earth experience, even for what you might consider dream sequences or the more fantastical elements of it. It is always centrally grounded in the house and in like what's supposed to be like a very realistic lived experience of this one crazy abnormal family.
Right.
Which it lends it a kind of gravitas and a kind of relatability that is often missing from things that try and take this kind of like high hoity-toity kind of tone to soft emotional issues.
Yeah, I think it's because it's like a multi-layered approach that's all set up very well. It's the great-grandmother of the family is like a very imaginative, like artist type, and every time there's like a tragedy in the family, she does everything in her power to like create like a folk tale essentially about the death of the person and kind of immortalize them,
Right.
and create this little story around it. And they're presented through that lens, but you're always aware of the duality of it, like the real situation and the embellishment on top of it, which I think makes it work really well.
Absolutely. Like that embellishment is probably the closest thing when I was trying to, work around in my own head, like what's the point of this game, is how subtly and how much respect they must have for the player in order to let you slowly realize that a lot of these vignettes that you're seeing are mostly like stories played up by one particular perspective and one member of the family, and let you come to the understanding of the kind of devastating effects that kind of has on each successive generation.
Yeah.
And that's more than unique. That's like profound and interesting and many other words that I don't normally use to describe game narratives.
Yeah. It is one of those things where when you come to a walking simulator, just like off the bat, you expect it to be something that is more narratively focused, whereas this game is narratively focused, but it's a really emotional narrative, and to the point where most of the things that happen in the game are not physically real, like not actually occurring. They are emotional retellings of things that have already happened, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's all told in this like pulled back sort of way, where you're getting and it tells you as you go through it who is the person that's being affected by this, and in some cases it's pretty distant, where it's like the psychiatrist telling Lewis's story, or like a child's father telling the story of the death of their infant son through the like scrawling on the back of divorce papers. Like it's really diverse in the way that it goes about telling its stories, and therefore in order to like stay true to that, they also are very diverse in the way that they present them, the way that you play through them.
Yeah, and it also does a lot of that, I don't know if I want to call it like new wave for video games, but like that really heavy environmental storytelling where a lot of details can be gleaned from like observing the house and reading things and looking for little details that aren't directly told to you, which is really popular these days.
Yeah, and it helped in no small part by the fact that the VO in this game is actually just really good. And this is something we haven't actually talked about in a long time, because VO is historically not that great. But the actress that plays Edith does a really good job of sort of like explaining things in a way that actually feels natural. They have this framing device where she's writing a journal for her unborn son ends up being to read whenever they're born, and it's like it puts it in a way, like into the game in a way that makes it make a lot more sense than it would in most. and I just have a lot of respect for the way that this whole thing was built from the ground up. And so, let's actually get into the game then.
Ugh.
Oh no.
Can't we just continue talking about insufferable narrative, high-minded concepts?
Well, we could, but the game clearly doesn't want that to be its focus. And the reason I say that is because you mentioned it before, and I was going to interject, but we had some other shit to say before that. But the game had, like, it is a lofty goal that this game sets for itself, telling this emotional story of somebody, like, basically reliving the deaths of their entire extended family in one evening. And so the game gives you very little when it comes to this, like, foreshadowing before you actually get into it. So your first thing that you do in the game is just approach the house, and you get more of like a fantasy vibe off of it than anything else.
I wanted to specifically, just sidebar, talk about the house a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the house reminds me of like something out of a cartoon. Like, it made me think of like CatDog's house or like Arnold's room or like SpongeBob's house, like those weird like fictional houses you wished you could live in as a kid.
Right.
But all the kids that grew up in this house got to experience that for real, which I just think is a neat visual.
I think in the design notes they specifically mentioned
CatDog's
CatDog's house as a key source of inspiration.
Yeah, like what's the one with the psychiatrist, that you mentioned just moments ago?
Oh, Lewis?
Yeah, Lewis. His room especially is like a boat.
Yeah.
That is like on top of the house that has been like turned into a room. Like, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's very Adventure Timey.
Yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah. Another good house to add to the list.
Yes. Classic cartoon house.
Makeshift house.
It's one of those things like where when playing the game you're like, this would be fucking actually sick to like go in and explore this house, until you get to the part where you have to like crawl on the roof to get into some rooms. I'm like, I don't know if I want to live here anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many ladders I want to take to go to bed every night. Like, it seems like a lot.
I was secretly really hoping that one of the death sequences would just be someone screwing up trying to get to their room in the house.
It's like, oops, the wind was blowing mighty hard that day, and Bob just took a tumble right off the porch.
Maybe we shouldn't have our children walk up sloped surfaces outside 4 stories up.
They had an infant in an annex that in order to access it, you have to get on the roof and climb a ladder to a porch and then crawl through a cubbyhole to get to. Like, that's insanity.
Well, when they were living in them, the rooms weren't sealed, so you could just
walk out the door
them from the house.
I did kind of forget about that, but then
but the ones up on top,
exists.
all of Don's kids had to climb up on the roof.
Yeah. There's no way around it.
Yeah. They had school up there, even. But anyway.
Oh, yeah, so maybe they didn't have to go downstairs.
Yeah.
That being said, I never saw a bathroom anywhere but on the first floor, so...
Well, at those kind of heights, the wind just kind of is able to pick it up enough that it just carries it out to sea.
Just piss off the roof.
Yeah, no, that's all... Okay, we're not going to talk about the physics of shitting from the top of a house. I'm just going to raise the point that it is clearly an issue.
Right. All right, but... Sidebar over.
Oh, yeah.
Back to what you were originally saying.
Well, that was actually a large part of what it was that I was going to get into. Shitting from a house. What was the appearance of the house and, like, looking at it from a distance. But I think we've covered everything that implies right off from the beginning. Mm-hmm. But the first proper, like, narrative beat in the game is when you get into Molly's room. So Molly, if you were not aware, which I'm sure you are, is the one that, like, is the sequence of you becoming different, hungrier creatures every moment, right? They do not start with something that most people are going to go like, oh, it's just normal.
No, I think it's a strong opening though.
It's really strong.
Because it even like kind of works as a microcosm of the rest of the game, where like it keeps changing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a lot like when we talked about in the Shadow of the Colossus episode, where like I feel like you could arrange the battles in like a million different ways. So you have to kind of like plan these vignettes out in a certain way so that they have like a nice flow to them.
Right.
And I thought this was a really good starting point.
Yeah. Molly's story both established how fantastical the narrative was willing to get. Luckily, early at a time when you don't know enough about the game to immediately know whether what you're seeing is like real or not real. Like right after Molly's story, it was generally unclear to me whether the monster was a thing that existed.
Right.
I thought like, oh, maybe the family curse is like a kraken that's just like after their family.
Yeah, you don't know how supernatural it might get at that point.
In her room, there's literally like a kraken drawing, like attacking the house as they came over the sea. So I was like, oh man, I'm gonna end of this game. I'm gonna have to like parlay with this kraken, get this family all sorted out. But no, it was not. It was actually just a really clever narrative embellishment of the effects of hallucinating horribly after eating a lot of non-edible poisonous things.
Yeah.
Which I realized later after other things ended up being narrative embellishments of other things. And I was like, oh, it's actually really cool and smart that they picked that one.
Yeah. I actually kind of have to wonder where, like at what point or how much of Molly's story is legitimately a literal thing that happened, because I can totally see like a hungry little girl eating some gerbil food and I can see a hungry little girl eating holly berries off of a plant. This is all fine. Mm-hmm. No fucking person in their right mind would begin to eat a tube of toothpaste and then continue with it.
I feel like that's like a thing.
It's a thing, Chad. I've
This
got
is a
news for you.
thing?
This is a
Oh.
thing.
I know that it's...
How has the human race not died off yet?
It's a thing that like... I don't know exactly how to phrase this at all, but I was just made aware of it in South Park. There's that episode where Cartman is pretending to be a robot for Butters, and so he doesn't eat anything because he's trying to maintain the illusion for Butters. And when he gets the chance, he like runs into the bathroom and like eats a tube of toothpaste. Like I think it's a thing where if you're in dire straits, you can survive by eating toothpaste. I don't know where that comes from.
Oh, so you think... I thought it was like a weird internet thing that would get a TLC episode of some kind of television show.
Right.
You thought...
That could also be true.
You thought that it was just like a Bear Grylls crazy urban survival tactic when
That's
the
what I'm
apocalypse
saying,
comes?
yes.
Okay.
I don't know. See, like, the one way that I can, like, actually can rationalize this is that there is, like, an incredibly rare disease or mental illness. I'm not actually even sure what ends of the human body this affects, where you will just eat anything. It's like everyone who has that show, or on that show where they
My
just
Strange
eat shit.
Addiction.
Yeah. Or...
I'm addicted to eating to rocks or whatever.
Yeah, like that woman who just walked around and ate change all day.
Yeah, goddamn.
And like the guy who like ate a
weird.
bicycle famously, and
Yeah.
that French dude who ate like snakes and shit. Like all of this is like that's a documented.
No, there
thing.
was
Whoa.
one where someone was addicted to eating glass, and oh my god, did it make me want to just kill myself?
Hold the phone.
Yeah.
I'd forward eating snakes nowhere near as weird as any of these things we have just mentioned.
That's actually a good point. If I could remember the guy's name, I'll like throw a link in the.
Are we
to the
talking
Wikipedia
live
page.
snakes?
This dude, I just mentioned the snake thing because I remember it like being particularly interesting to me.
Yeah.
He ate everything, and he ate pounds and pounds of everything. Like he ate like constantly and was never not hungry, and he died at a young age. But this is like back in the before times, in the long ago.
I'm just picturing a man now just eating a snake in the same way they eat one of those disgusting, huge, like giant gummy worms. They just pull it. Oh man, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the video game? This
Oh,
is
yeah.
terrible.
But anyway, I think what actually is the truth of Molly's story is that The mistletoe in the bathroom that she eats, mistletoe is poisonous. So she was poisoned and died.
Yeah, that is what it is, and like the rest of it is just either her imagination or an actual hallucination, one of the two. But either way, it's a powerful opener, and it has the hardest achievement to get in the game, where you have to catch 2 rabbits in 2 swoops. However, I guess fucking Andy is just a god of video games.
Swish.
Oh god, this next one I've definitely written the wrong name down on, so my plan is already falling apart. But between Molly and the next guy,
oh, you're just gonna slide over it. Okay.
Yeah, who is not Sam. Sam is his brother, who's the one who grows up he's the one with like all of the military shit in his room. But the other kid is the one on the swing. In between those 2 rooms is when you sort of get introduced to what is like the primary like exploration part of this game, where you have to go through the house and find these like hidden passages that are just all over the place. And in this particular one is like a bookshelf that you move a thing and the fucking wall opens up and then you're like, oh dang. Let's get out of here.
Yeah, that's another thing about the house that's very cool is that it has secret passageways.
Yeah.
Like, I would have fucking loved to have grown up in a house with secret passageways. That would be so sweet.
Yeah. The like closest... Oh, because this is something I was going to mention before and just totally forgot. The closest real-life example that I can come up with to a house like this is the Winchester Mansion.
I can't believe we didn't bring it up yet.
Right? Where this woman thought that the guns that her husband made, all of the ghosts that were, killed by the guns were chasing after her. So she just kept building extensions onto her house that were just like crazy stairways to nowhere and shit. But that did not have secret passageways. It just had nonsense passageways.
Okay, so this woman thought that the ghosts, like she had
people killed by the guns her husband made.
No, I get the irony that she perceived happening in her death. My question is her stance on ghost physics. Because she seems to presuppose that the ghosts, like, physically travel down hallways like people.
And not only that, but they're slow enough at it that they would get lost and not be able to find
her.
Yeah,
that you could build a house
Maybe
attachments.
she was thinking that they would haunt the house that existed when they were, like, as it was when they were killed. So she built new rooms. They wouldn't haunt those ones.
Yeah, it's like a technicality.
Yes.
Yeah.
She read the ghost contract.
This is the crazy tangents episode of the NOCLIP podcast. We're not experts on anything that we've just talked about.
The brother's name is Calvin.
Calvin. Okay, so Calvin is the kid whose room you enter, and it's the one that's sort of cordoned off, like it's split in half. And one of the more like fucked up lines I remember reading in the game is just like, Sam shared a room with his dead brother for 12 years. I'm like, that sucks, like, real bad. If you just, like, had to sleep in half a room while the other half of the room is just, like, dedicated to your brother who is now dead. Like,
I had to even think about that line for a second. I was like, did someone just not proofread that? Like, he lived with his dead brother for 12 years? But, yeah, obviously they meant it.
And that was the brother
that the room was kept
that had like the really stupid death, right? That was the brother that just like fell off a swing like a dumbass.
Well, I wouldn't blame... I mean, I blame him a little bit, but he was also a child.
I believe he's the only one who literally killed themselves in the most literal way possible.
True, but you also have to point the blame at whoever built a swing on the edge of a goddamn cliff. Like, that's the most irresponsible thing. It's not even like one of those like swings that has like the leg holes in it. It's just like straight up a wooden plank.
It's basically an invitation to kill yourself by jumping off the swing and flying off the cliff.
Right.
Because like in the fences even looks like it's been hit before. Like a kid, it's like kind of like bent out and looks like something's happened to it.
Yep.
And I'm willing to bet that's how he broke his leg.
Yeah,
he jumped off the swing and hit the fence already.
Oh, so this was like a battle of attrition for this kid, where the parents kept erecting barriers to his own demise that it kept smashing smashing through with his own body like a human embodiment of Goat Simulator. Okay.
Not only that, but like this is also a kid with like aeronautic aspirations, where like a lot of his room is like space themed, and like he said his brother said that he wouldn't fly and all that shit. Like this could have played out another way, where he attempted to actually safely glide down the mountain with like a homemade hang glider or some shit, depending on the imagination of the kid. He was gonna die regardless. Like, this swing was just like there to kill, and it claimed blood that day. If Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes had this strip, it would have ended in a way sadder way than it already did. And probably about a year into its run.
I love that this suggests that Calvin had like a fundamental misunderstanding of why astronauts wear helmets. Like, think, oh man, they must have the helmet on so that when they fall, they don't just kill themselves.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's Calvin.
Stupid. God.
Yeah, I don't know if this, because his death doesn't necessarily play into the larger narrative as a whole, and was not particularly like mechanically strong.
Yeah, I think his is the weakest.
Yeah, I agree.
The second weakest, but I'll get into it.
I'm probably just forgetting
much
right now.
later.
Like the only thing you can even construe as fantastical in this scene is like he actually managed to like
go
go 360 on a swing. I don't know how mad.
Yeah,
Like,
it does kind of work as its own standalone little like art piece of a game, like where the poem matches up with like the visuals nicely.
I could have seen potentially that as like this segment is like a game jam game.
Yeah.
That like got a bunch of attention and people fucking lost their shit over it. But that's how good this game is, that is just included as part of this larger game.
yeah. They cut out the parts where you had to get through the fences and then walk back to the
Right,
swing
yeah.
and go, like,
It's a very different game than what I was envisioning. Anyway, so we're going to move on from here. Because the first time that there's like a genuine like puzzle in the game follows this next one, which is Barbara. And Barbara was the movie star that has the like, oh god, what is it? Tales from the Crypt style like comic book thing. I've been waving my hand as if I was turning
Windshield
enormous
wiper.
this whole time, just like trying to get somebody to say comic, I guess. I don't know. This is the one where this is the first time in the game where they sort of take the art style, and I think like the only time in the game where they take the art style in a completely different. I mean, they just put like a Photoshop shader over the entire thing, but
Posterize.
yeah, it still looks really interesting, and I do want to at least call that out.
And another like interesting little tidbit of her character is that she was a child star. Like she actually was like in a film as a child, which is like one of the first details like I noticed I remember when we first played the game. That was the first door, like peephole I looked through.
Right.
And I just thought that was like an interesting little detail. I don't know. That stuck in my mind.
I do also want to mention that the game doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail about the movie, which is appropriate because it's not what this is about. But it is like this weird like Bigfoot is my best friend movie, and it's really odd. Like, I can't even imagine a movie that, one, has that premise, and two, is popular among horror fans.
Wait. You've misunderstood something fundamentally here. This was not like a kiddie Bigfoot is my friend film. It was like a horror film in which she was being stalked and attacked by Bigfoot.
Pursued by Bigfoot?
Yeah, her whole thing was her scream.
Yeah. I mean, but that can make sense even in because nobody just immediately befriends Bigfoot. It takes time, and you have to build a relationship with a Yeti.
I'm trying to remember, like, there is a poster or some kind of like a cardboard cutout thing in a room. And I do kind of want to say that it's like a cutesy poster of like her with the Bigfoot.
Yeah, there's a cardboard standing and Bigfoot's got a big fucking smile plastered on his face.
Well, that's because it's the
Bigfoot,
40s.
more like big smile.
It's the 40s and like transgressive imagery was just banned wholesale, and you were only allowed to project happiness and tranquility in life because it was the middle of the Second World War, and you really couldn't afford to like release anything.
Well, there's also a
censors would get
boom in horror movie production during that time. What an unusual piece of information that I happen to know that you've stumbled upon. And a lot of people theorize that it's because people wanted to go to a movie that displayed some of the worst things imaginable because it took them away from the reality, which I could also see being an argument for the Bigfoot movie being like an actual horror movie as opposed to like a Dunstan checks in, but Dunstan's 8 feet tall kind of situation.
Well, regardless.
Wait, hold on.
And I do want to say it makes more sense for it to be a horror movie because the whole setup in the comic is that it's like a horror convention that she's been invited to.
Right.
But anyway, but despite the cutesy cardboard cutout in her room.
My key argument here is that no matter how good your scream was, I don't think it's possible to get famous for your scream if you scream like maybe one time. Because you're not going to have in the kids' version of the film like multiple Bigfoot comes around and I scream scenes. It's going to be like one that they like hurriedly rush past to get to like the cutesy Bigfoot child star interactions.
Right. New theory. What if I'm right and you're wrong? And there's a pack it in, boys. And there's a scream when she sees Bigfoot for the first time that is just the embodiment of pure blood-curdling terror. And then at the end of the movie, Bigfoot gets shot by some guy, and then there's the second scream that really conveys a lot of like deep emotion.
Oh man, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Yeah.
Anywho. So she's going to a horror convention, and her like straight up Fred from Scooby-Doo boyfriend wants to convince her to like practice up her scream.
Yeah, because she's like a washed up child actor. Mm-hmm. At this age, she's like what, like at 17 or something in the comic.
Her boyfriend is wearing a Letterman jacket, which
so
suggests
she's like in high school.
She's either in high school or her boyfriend is a tremendous douchebag.
Right, probably both.
Her death was in 1960, so I would say 20 is probably about as old as she could be.
Okay.
So,
but anyway,
yeah. I mean, I don't really necessarily feel like I need to summarize the entire plot, but basically
Please don't, no.
Yeah, that would be terrible. The key mechanical difference in this one is that, in addition to it mostly being like a cutscene, because everything just gets played out by the comic, whenever you do have control, you actually have full control, which is kind of rare for the rest of the game and in all places prior. And you even get, like, a weapon and can swing it with a button, which is not, I guess, what you would expect normally.
Yeah, it's novel in that it's the most basic of all video game interactions possible, but it's in the context of a walking simulator.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's incredible. Again, last ambiguity in my mind about this scene. I know what happens at the end of the story in the Tales of the Crypt frame narrative, in which a gang of ruffians end up being the people from the convention that come and like turn into nebulous flesh-eating creatures. What happened outside the frame narrative? How did she die not with fantasy magic?
I'm thinking maybe her boyfriend killed her.
That's possible.
Or there's some kind of accident and he just left.
Right.
Slowly because of the crutches, yeah.
My guess, and this is purely a guess, and I because they intentionally don't like give it direct closure because they don't want to set up that like expectation, I think. But the one part of the narrative that's like directly actually two parts, because one of them is the aforementioned a puzzle in the game about turning the crank on the music box. But the other thing that actually has a direct correlation in the house is the repaired guardrail. So I'm guessing that no killer fell off of the balcony. I think she did and just died there.
Oh.
That's my guess, but I could be wrong. There could have actually been a murderer on the loose.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she was a victim of the Zodiac killer or something. The time frame is about right.
Because that kid was under the bed, and he was scarred for life and lived underneath the house for 30 years. That's that same person, right? That boy became the house liver.
Yeah.
The house liver.
Metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, say the one who lives in the house and also the one who processes toxins.
Yes. So, like, I assume that kid wouldn't... Like, it would mess you up to see your sister, like, fall off a second-floor balcony and, like, snap her spine and die. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it would, like, make you live under a house in a prepper situation scar you. Like, I feel like I'd get over that in, like, 3 years, even if I was, like, 8. But I don't know. Maybe I was just a hardy child full of
Well, I feel like we
coldness.
should backpedal and talk about that in a second when we get to him. But I think that this is probably my second favorite vignette. Mm-hmm. And I think it was, like, the moment that I really, like, kind of fell in love with the game. Because the initial... sequence with Molly sets things up and kind of like primes you for what is to come next, but this is where like they really feels like they start pushing it. Mm-hmm. And they switch up the visual style and they present, and like this is nothing like super unique, but they present the visuals like a comic book. They actually like keep the panels up on screen and it really kind of feels like you're controlling a comic. It's done really well. Yeah. And weirdly, they licensed the Halloween theme.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if that was public domain.
No.
No, they've made enough of those movies over the years that it has to be, like the copyright has to be re-upped on that. There's no way they let that expire.
It added to the pulpiness, though.
Oh, for sure.
And, yeah, it's just a really well-executed scene. It's pretty tense. Like, you don't know what's going to happen once again. Don't know how supernatural it might get.
Right.
The panels even have non-aesthetic value. You can actually use them as hints of where to go, as I did like 2 times when I wasn't sure which direction in the house I should be moving.
Right.
You can just look at the next panel and be like, oh, I'm supposed to be at this bed. Okay.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to push back on your claim that that's finding the music box key this way is a puzzle when it's just shown to you.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's kind of bullshit that the game prevents you from sequence breaking.
Oh, you tried this?
Just coincidentally, when we played this the first time, like a year ago or whatever.
Couldn't have been more than that.
We super like meticulously explored the house because that's how we are.
Yeah.
And I remember winding the music box, and nothing ever happened. I don't like, and
I tried it this most recent time as well.
And it won't let you. Like, I feel like we definitely would have found that key early.
Right.
If it, unless if the game didn't stop you from getting it before you saw this sequence.
Yeah.
That's one of the only little nitpicks I have with this game, actually. But anyway, not a big deal.
No. I'd also like to call out I would also like to concede that it might as well not be a puzzle. I just think that there are probably other puzzles in games that are equally like just shown to you. Like look at the monkey dungeon in was that Twilight Princess? Yeah. Where it's just like you have to get over here and you know what to do, and then the monkey does it anyway, and you're like, yeah, okay.
That's not really supposed to be a puzzle. They're there just to kind of like give like a new player like a nudge as to where to go next.
It's to show them a nice monkey, Chad. It's not to
and
not
also
to
they
engage
just
them.
have like a cute monkey.
You're right. Edith Finch, no monkeys, 0 out of 10.
But anyway,
there was that one kid that jumped off of a swing and fell to his death.
Monkeys would do that.
They would.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, the one thing that I did want to say on this before we move on is, like, big shout-outs to the Crypt Keeper guy. Not for doing, like, a particularly great job of reading his lines and being a good actor, which I think he, was, but not... It wasn't like I wasn't destroyed by this performance. It's just the fact that it was so consistently on that level that the Crypt Keeper is. it was, I don't know, I really enjoyed it as like a concept throughout the whole thing.
How do you describe the tone of the Crypt Keeper?
Inappropriately morbidly humorous.
It's kind of like a childlike excitement for like Halloween.
Sure.
Like there's a certain amount of like, yes.
I actually like that description. Yeah. It's like the Addams Family as told by Gilbert Gottfried. It's an impossible to not.
I wish I could do a Gilbert Gottfried impersonation, but I cannot.
It's dark humor told by an impossible to not pay attention to voice. But anyway, you pop that key out of the music box after you get out of your little comic reverie, and then you go down to the basement. The basement, I think, is probably the biggest like wasted potential as far as the game went, because like you have this whole house and like it's all very special, but the basement is just not special at all. It's just sort of a one room and then like a little dark area in the garage, and then that's it. That's all you get. And then you go into the sub basement. You go into Arsenal gear.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when did
Metal Gear Solid 2?
Yeah, no. When did Barbara die? What year?
1960.
1960. It's like, because they did keep it locked after that. What's the brother's name?
Walter.
Well, once Walter moves down there, they keep it locked, so no one else can go down there. So that might explain it.
Right.
And also, I mean, when the rest of the house is so fantastical, you might just need some space. That's just like for efficiency and
It's
for
like,
storing things.
I've had a rough day of whimsy. I need to get to something like
Retired to the
grounded.
basement, yeah. Below grounded.
Before we lock up this basement, we got to make sure we take every book we own and strew it throughout the house at random locations.
Make a coffee table out of these and put the TV on top of that.
So yeah, for each of these, this is a little meta commentary here. For each of these, as I have been going down the list, I've put their death year, their name, and then in case the name didn't do it for me, I also put in like a parenthetical reminder of what the primary premise of it was. So we had Molly eating, Sam, which was wrong, Calvin the swing, Barbara comic, and now we're on to Walter Peaches.
I would have put bomb shelter.
Yeah. In
crusty
retrospect, anything but Peaches.
Now, Peaches is fair, though.
Yeah, Peaches is the right answer.
Yeah.
Also the worst vignette, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably.
I still have one that I like less, but I will explain that more in depth when we get to it.
If your answer is going to be Milton, I push back on that.
It is, but it's not because of the vignette itself.
It's
but
because there isn't one.
Hold on.
No.
We've got complaining to do
Okay,
now.
yeah.
Guys.
Yeah,
It's not complaining to do in the future. And my complaint now is that this is a walking simulator that just wanted to be a movie. Like you pretty much don't move through the entirety. You move to leave, and everything else is a scene that plays at you. There's not even like the barest minimum amount of input for the majority of the sequence.
I kind of disagree with that. Well, I mean, that's a true statement. But I think this is enhanced by being interactive because repeating the action of actually opening the can of peaches each time, I kind of think puts you in his shoes. However minor you might have felt, that connection, I think it's there. And I think it puts you in the mindset of the character, and I don't think it would be as impactful if you just watched it or read about it or whatever.
Yeah. I agree with that, and we keep bringing up the idea of like our favorite, least favorite vignettes. I didn't really give that any consideration while I was playing the game.
Me neither.
And
Me neither.
Thinking back on it now, this is probably on the lower end of it, which is fine. But also, as far as like this wanting to be a movie or even like some kind of like YouTube haiku or whatever, this like
What?
this bit like
Is
this
that a
one.
thing?
What do you mean? Okay, we need to have an internet cultural intervention right now. Okay, a YouTube haiku is not just a description of a short YouTube video. It's a description of a short YouTube video with a certain tone.
Okay, so it is a thing.
Yes,
Okay.
it's like my favorite subreddit. It's like one of the
Okay.
best things on the internet
I'm gonna say,
when it's good.
if it isn't, that needs to be a thing.
Yeah, no, it's already been taken care of. I'm saying the idea of just like a guy in a shelter opens a can of peaches and then drinks them whole while talking about a monster could be a 7-second clip that I would go like, huh, that was weird. But the fact that like this thing it doesn't have enough visually going on to even qualify it as like a moving picture tone piece. It's more of an essay that has a visual element attached to it. Like the dialogue and like the words in this game, the written word plays way more heavily than in the majority of other games. In this particular one, it's almost entirely about words. Like it's just what he's thinking and like what he's, I guess, writing in a journal or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That's really I don't take issue with it. I still enjoyed the whole segment.
Yeah.
I just didn't.
I'd say also in this one's defense, like I was saying earlier about like these vignettes being placed in a certain order that gives them like an ebb and flow. I think this is a good like cool down after the comic book one, which is a really high point. And I really think that as I was getting at earlier, like it does a lot to put you in the character's mindset. And I also like being able to walk around the bunker, just the little bit that you get to, and you can walk over to the fake window and see the painting there.
Fake window was good, yeah.
Like there are like little details that you get to soak in because of the fact that it is a game. And I don't know. I think it fits well where it is in the narrative. And I don't know. It worked for me.
Yeah. I agree. I think that it is overall good. However, it is, and we're gonna. So I'm leading into a very long string of things.
Yes.
The first one is this is the source of the only actual note that I took, as you can see here, which has nothing to do with the vignette itself. It's just immediately after it. So at the end of this one, the way that Walter actually dies is that he leaves and then gets hit by a train, which is like the end of a Shaggy Dog joke. Like, he goes through this whole process of like overcoming his fears and deciding to break out of his routine. And then the most improbable scenario, a train runs him over. And it's foreshadowed, obviously, the rumbling and everything. Like, it's the growling of a monster. It's a train. But then it ends, and then you, as Edith, go, now I know how to leave. And so you walk out the door, and then the train tracks are there, and then you walk a little bit, and then it's just a cliff. Like, train tracks, like, rent in multiple angles, and then just cascades into the ocean. What the fuck happened between 2005 and 2017 that the train tracks now just end at the shore?
Well, it's like the train isn't useful anymore, so they don't use the track.
Chad, like,
so they like dismantle. There was probably a bridge.
The track is
and they
like
dismantled
destroyed.
Yes.
Well, they left the track there.
This comes back, like many things in life, Chad, to the deleterious effects of erosion. This is given environmental changes and enough time, wind and water will combine to eventually cause the land itself to crumble into the sea, as happened with these tracks, which have been forced to enormous tiny pressures over dozens of years and have turned them into the terrible rusted mess that you see today.
I'm no geologist. I'll come right out and say
well,
it, all right?
And assuming there used to be a bridge that the train went over.
That's the thing. It was a forest.
Yeah, I don't know why you're so attached to this bridge theory.
Because
they're on it.
They live on an island. If the train ran across the island, there need to be bridges.
Maybe they need to get together side of the island. We don't know how big this island is.
Also,
it ends at a cliff.
Is it confirmed that they live on an island and not just on the shore?
It's literally it's called something island.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that there was a bridge that came to that cliff and through the tunnel, and whatever reason they didn't need the train anymore. Whatever they transported, not needed anymore. Get rid of the bridge and the train. So they would, to get rid of a bridge, you would demolish it. You would blow it up.
Right, with like TNT.
And that would explain the Mango train tracks. And they never root up train tracks, so they don't have to because it takes a ton of labor.
Yeah, they just allow them to turn into brown fields.
Brown fields. There you go.
Don't make me include a clip of you explaining brown fields on the podcast. You're destroying me. I will accept all of these explanations for the time being. Listeners, if you have any theories on where the fuck the rest of the land went, please explain. Send us an email.
If you have perhaps any idea about what kind of hub of industry existed 30 years ago that required someone to build train tracks to an island.
Yeah. Also, 12 years ago, because Walter died in 2005.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. It was a really short period of time.
Okay, that's oh god, that changes everything. You can't have that kind of erosion happening in 12 years.
That's why I fucking told it the first time. The explosives now seem way more. Yeah. But as you exit the tunnel, you get to the inexplicable train track termination. On your left, you see the shoreline and the rest of the Finch household. Mm-hmm. And I would say at this point, you're at about the second half of the game, which means that we're about to be at the second half of the podcast. So we're going to take a break. So during the break, we're going to be playing a promo. A podcast is starting up by the name of Podcast Junkie, who, I'll let the dude explain it himself because we're going to play the promo. But we figured, why not? Let's go ahead and give a little bit of exposure to the 8 people who listen to us.
Because this man seems nice.
Yeah, so if advertisements are not your jam, and you were like, this is the one podcast that didn't advertise shit. It's about 2.5 minutes long, so you can just jump on over. But I recommend taking a listen. We'll be back with, I believe, your mom. Meaning your character's mom. I'm not making a your mom joke.
Yes, you are.
Well, I was.
Wasn't the kid with the kite next?
He's your
mom's
brother. Yeah. Hey.
Do you remember hearing stories from your parents or grandparents about huddling around the old radio and listening to a radio drama?
And now, Mystery Theater, brought to you in part by True Value Hardware, your store of first choice. Come in.
Stories that not only could you see play out in your head, stories of love, mystery, and murder. Stories that would bring families together, even if for just one night. But it would be discussed until the next chapter was released. Or how about when your parents used to put you to bed early enough so they could sit down and enjoy the nightly news?
Good evening from CBS News. This is Newsbreak. Moments from now, President Reagan will speak to the nation and the Congress. The burden of the message: his health is much improved after the shooting a month ago, but the nation's economic health is not, and the country needs the economic program, which is the centerpiece of his administration.
These news broadcasts were televised with big names from back in the day, and even bigger stories of war, economic struggle, or economic bliss, and the topics would affect us all. Then there were the boomboxes back on every shoulder and Walkmans in every pocket, with headphones on so we can enjoy and share our favorite music of the day. Then there was Netflix, the next evolution of human entertainment platforms, who created the new verb binge, where you could get lost for hours watching through a season of a show and then find a new show to binge on. And finally, that brings us to the next big evolution of audio in the history of man. What if I told you there was one platform that not only covered all the genres and topics that the past has enjoyed on so many different platforms? From the old-time audio dramas to the most breaking news of today's era. From history long forgotten, health tips from experts, in-depth dives into crimes and murders, from hobbies of all kinds like video games and technology, to interviews with the professional athletes that you watch, all these can be unlocked to you, and for free, in the world of podcasting. Podcasts are not your grandparents' radio or your parents' nightly news anchor. They are the evolution of audio and the evolution of entertainment in our day and age. Podcast Junkie will be here to help guide you on finding the perfect ones for you. Coming soon to all platforms. Podcast Junkie will be a bite-sized podcast ranging from 4 minutes to a max of 15, giving you a quick overview of why I personally enjoy podcasts, and even a sneak peek of an episode or a trailer for the show we're talking about that week. So stay tuned, and in the coming weeks, we'll hope you let Podcast Junkie be the TV guide, so to speak, or better yet, the podcast guide to your next obsession. Podcast Junkie.
Welcome back to the podcast. So where we left off is right when you exit the house proper and step out into the open air, I guess.
The glorious sea, with one of my favorite aesthetic touches of the entire overhouse, which is my word for the overworld in this game, because it's a house. But I, early on, was so obsessed with looking at the back windows of the house and seeing the wreckage in the distance, like the very appropriately placed red flashing bulb. Because if you remember early on, I still assumed that this was like a Kraken talking game.
Yeah.
So I thought that would be like the location of the final Kraken confrontation.
Of course.
So when it came that quickly, I was like, oh no, I don't know.
I'm not prepared. I don't have any of my weapons yet.
Yeah, this is
To
weird.
go back and get the crutch.
The slime creature hasn't come up at all again, even a single time. But it ended up still being cool, so I'm not sad about it.
Yeah. I do think that this section, this walking section, sort of has its own... It deserves to be talked about, and I think that what I want to discuss here is something that we haven't really mentioned yet, is that this game actually looks really good. It's one of those things where, because your game is so hyper-focused on one thing, you have a lot of extra resources that you can devote to the other elements of the game. And clearly, the visuals and the sound design get a lot of love. Little details really stick out, and even if it's not super finely detailed, it's not like the PT hallway where they had to do was have one hallway look really good. They have this. It's an attention to detail, and just an overall high fidelity of art, where the walking out into this vista and seeing the house in the distance and hearing the ocean and seeing the winding path up through the graveyard is just awe-inspiring. Might be a little bit of a strong term, but it is really powerful to actually walk out and see.
Yeah. It feels like the way that it seems like teachers always want you to feel when you go on school trips to impressive locations. This game actually gives you the feeling of going to Niagara Falls and not the feeling of going on with 500 children in a very structured environment to Niagara Falls.
And I'd be the Niagara Falls, their 1 million gallons of water goes over the falls an hour, and you're just trying to get Lucy's phone number the whole time.
I feel like that's not a fair comparison. If you can go to Niagara Falls and not be impressed.
Canonically, JJ not impressed by waterfalls.
I'm impressed. I'm just also deeply distracted. This is I forget. I think it might have been Thoreau. It was one of that style of person in the U.S. in the 1800s or whatever, who said that travel must only be done in solitude, and that's what I'm trying to evoke here. So that other people are distracting and take you out of the moment repeatedly, so you lose focus. And that's why going on school trips to grand locations is bad. If the school could finance you going by yourself to Niagara Falls for a powerful spiritual experience, that would be dope. but they can't do that.
Could the school also like rent out the whole area so that it isn't really touristy and commercialized, so that you could appreciate it?
See, you're finding all the barriers, and this is why I'm saying that despite if you could get the Niagara Falls experience when it was alone, and you're like the initial explorer who has like stumbled upon this grandest wonder of the world, like that's gonna blow out of the water the experience of finding this cool house in a video game, but because it's actually compared against like the shitty, commercialized, just like deeply infected and rotting version of Niagara Falls against like this pristine cool house, I think the cool house comes out ahead.
Yes, screw Niagara Falls.
Get dunked on. But anyways.
Yeah, so you go past this gorgeous vista that we just spent a minute talking about in comparison to Niagara Falls for some reason. So you go past this and you go up the winding path toward the house and toward the graveyard. And so you go actually through the graveyard and you can see each of the gravestones, though the first area that you go through is like a pet cemetery. This is not really ever expanded on. There's a reference to there being a gerbil in the game.
3.
There are 3 gerbils, but only one of them has... There's even more than 3 gerbils. There's a handful of gerbils. Only one of them is ever like referenced in like narrative in Molly's story. And then like they reference the cat briefly that's named after Molly. But that's a whole thing. They're like, I think the pet cemetery is real sad, but they give you no reason to feel sad about it other than dead animals are sad inherently.
Yeah, I think it's just supposed to like be a detail that kind of
like
makes
flavor.
it feel more real, like that they would have pets as well.
But yeah, so then you go through and you go visit each of the graves. I don't have a ton to say about this, but it's obviously supposed to be this sort of like poignant breather moment. I just don't necessarily know that it worked. Like maybe each of the thought process was that each of the individual stories were a gut punch, and so they wanted to stop working the body for a moment and start working the mind.
My read on it is you would expect this moment to be an emotional gut punch as well because you're walking through a graveyard. But it seems like they don't go with that approach, and instead it's there to deliver the detail of great grandma Edie's character, where when they moved there, they built the graveyard before they started building the house.
Right.
And to kind of like flesh out that little bit of the backstory about how she's obsessed with the curse and memorializing everybody.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does give characterization to Edie, who, up until this point, like, she's sort of like the central character of the narrative. But her characterization doesn't really come until pretty late in the game. And this is sort of where you get the most idea of... You see what she's done with the rooms, but it doesn't seem wholly unusual. Like, it seems strange and not something that most people would do, but it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that somebody would want to memorialize in that way. Whereas the graveyard gives you an idea that she has an actual sort of like you said, an obsession.
Yeah, well, you get to go through her room earlier as well after you go through Molly's, which also clues you into that as well.
The house kind of consistently rests on a balance between like Hogwarts and like mental illness dungeon, and so this was one of the first scenes that really, I love how it presses both of those angles really hard, and how the game really as a whole lets you kind of keep reinterpreting the grand gestures that you're seeing as evidence of something amazing and wonderful at first, and then a problem the more time you spend in the space.
I agree with that completely. But beyond that, as you progress out of the graveyard, you get back to the house. And so now you're coming up on the more recent generations of the Finch family, and the people who are born sort of more in modern times, and the stories become more like... this is kind of weird to think about because they're no longer period pieces, so I feel like I relate more closely to the like the more modern versions of these. And they're even less ambiguous, really, as they go on. Well, with the exception of we'll get there.
With the exception of Magic Brian.
Yeah, it's Magic Brian.
He literally disappeared from on top of a house. Whatever, we'll get there.
So the first of these that you come to is Sam, who is I'll pull my list back out, but Sam is the father of your grandfather. Does that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that how familial relationships work? And his it's interesting because his actual vignette so switches your expectation based on his room aesthetically, because you walk in, he has all this military propaganda on the wall, and his entire vignette is about photography. And I guess he was a wartime photographer, and that was his job in the military, and you get that if you read into their literal documents and things that you can read, as well as just the stuff that's there. I didn't really find this one particularly special, but it was a really cool interface for it. I liked the focusing and everything.
I like this one. The gimmick is one of the better ones, I think. That you control a camera, taking pictures of a hunting trip. But I like that it shows just kind of a normal experience as opposed to the other ones. And I think the fact that it involves Dawn is kind of the reason why, because she was the one who was wise to Edie's bullshit and always pushed back against it. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that his story doesn't have a fantastical version of it, which I think is, I don't know, it fits.
Yeah. And they leave sort of the door open for interpretation on how much you really know about this character as a whole, not you the player, but your character as Edith. But because she does say that her mom never told her this story, but she is aware that her grandfather died, and sort of how in a vague sense. So seeing the more explicit version of it gives you sort of this. It's the lends itself to being the most grounded of the stories and the. Yeah, most grounded, I think, entirely for the entire thing. I would give it to the swing thing because it seems like such an obvious invitation to death, but it is literally not grounded. So I'm going to give it to Sam. So Sam had 3 kids, and you go into their room by crawling through this weird little cubbyhole. And on the other side, you get the 3 beds. And the way that they're sort of decked out and the room is set up, you can already kind of see where things went. The first one you come to is Gregory. I don't know what you guys think about this one, but I'm incredibly impressed that they've managed to make a child drowning in the bathtub in a game not feel like it was in bad taste or shocking, really.
Yeah, I would agree. It's very well executed. And I think it does that in multiple ways. Once again, it sets it all up in advance. It's not some kind of shocking twist or anything. We killed this baby. Aren't you shocked? Or anything like that.
Human Centipede 2.
Yeah.
You could have taken a page
just
out of this
stomp
book.
the baby's head. Dumb fucking thing. But, and I distracted myself now. Okay, no, very well set up, and it plays off of a lot of Nick Jr.-esque kind of imagery of the whale and the frog, and it all feels very whimsical and inviting. And the classical music that plays off of people always say play classical music for babies will make them smarter, blah blah blah. So it all feels thematically appropriate.
And it all adds to sort of the overall aesthetic of it as well.
Shows how much the parents are looking back at this circumstance and trying, like so many victims of tragedies are, to paint like the most positive possible light. Like when they think back at the memory of their child, they don't think of the almost certainly horrific actual images of the death, but instead like gaze on in wonderment about like what it must have been like to been this incredible baby who they never grew to know.
Well, it's like because they do it like an opera, right? Like it's the way that the music swells. It feels like you're watching like the Nutcracker or something, where it's like the synchronized movements of the toys, like as they circle around and create these like things where the frog will jump through and the splash comes up to the swells of the music and everything. And it is just this, they put it in such a detached from reality way, and they surround it with enough padding to keep it from jumping into shock value territory, which would be a really dangerous place to go with this.
Yeah, and they set it up even like very explicitly, like when you pick up the divorce papers, like it's stated that they are divorce papers,
right?
And you see where it's going like immediately, but it still manages to be impactful. So it's very well handled.
Yeah, it's probably maybe not like the best one of these that is developed. It is probably the most like emotionally jarring. Like this is the one that I feel like you could play outside of the context of the game and get a similar feeling to it, because Gregory being an infant can't really be characterized, so you don't need the development for it. It's just an interesting and unique way of showing the circumstance.
I actually disagree with you there, but we'll follow up on why I disagree when we get to Weed Bro's room.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll take strides to get to Weed Bro's room by moving on to Gus, who really embodies the name Gus. By being a rebellious bastard, flying his kite in a storm like a suicidal Ben Franklin.
So a Ben Franklin.
A regular Ben Franklin. This one, I mean, obviously, like, it sucks when a kid dies. This was the, like, most amusing one for me, like, as it was going on. Because, like, his personality comes out and he never says anything at all. Like, it's just in sort of his motions and his attitude. And at one point, he gives the finger to his dad. And all of that, like... I don't know, like even like his portrait where he's like 10 years old and has like a shitty mohawk and everything.
Yeah.
The game does a great job making you want this child to die and having a lot of release after this child's end finally plays out before your eyes.
Doesn't he not even get struck by lightning? Like,
No.
He just gets crushed by the wedding tent.
Yeah, the tent blows off and just destroys him.
Barely even makes sense. I guess if you get hit by the metal pole parts.
Yeah, I mean, like a giant tent like that's probably got a lot of metal.
Yeah, I assume. I guess there's also like the hurricane principle where like, a blade of glass or whatever moving at an appropriate speed will eviscerate you or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of it being fast, heavy, and him being small and frail.
Yeah.
It's most likely the cause of death.
It's probably the small, childlike, malformed bones that had not fully developed yet that were really the killer there.
Yeah, that seems likely. Yeah, there's a lot of possibility space here, but most likely I'm going to say crushed to death.
Yeah, after going through all of these, I'm going to say that this one is my least favorite.
Ooh, that's harsh. I really like everything about this one.
I like it is really satisfying to like fly the kite and like drag the letters, from the words around, but it doesn't really have much going for it other than that.
I like the poem. I like the fact that there's like an actual rhythmic, like metered story as opposed to like everything else. Like it is unique in its own way.
Yeah, I guess I'll put this on the same level as The Swing in my book. Because they kind of have the same thing going for them. It's a poem with a visual that goes with it very well.
Yeah. But if that's all we have to say about Punk Gus,
I do have like sort of a meta comment about the room that I missed out on earlier, which is I love the transition from military dad who clearly tries to impress upon his children the need for like strict structure to fight back against this perceived curse. And then the next room that you enter is like, this is a bedroom that's actually pretty much just a barracks.
Yeah.
Like, it's just 3 beds in a row with, like, a locker. Like, can you imagine growing up with, like, your locker across from you? It'd be bad.
They have a list of chores on the blackboard, and there's one that just says, Gregory, be a baby. This is good. It also, like, kind of tracks... like from a like generational standpoint also, because like historically whenever you usually grow up to have like a stage where you rebel against your parents, and so obviously Gus has this association of his dad and like the strict rules, and so his way of going against that was by ignoring everything he says and growing a mohawk. So like it all like it makes sense, like, whereas I think that if that element wasn't there and Sam wasn't as strict of a father as he was, I feel like Gus's inclusion would have been like a little bit weird because of like the general aesthetic of every other character in the game.
Yeah.
But I think that everything plays out, and they clearly put a lot of thought into this. So yeah, now you're going to go back outside, you circle around the other side of the house, and you climb up into the highest part of the building where your 2 brothers are... there.
So when we get into true CatDog territory.
Yeah. Ultimate CatDog.
The sequel to Ultimate Chicken Horse. But anyway.
Sick reference. So the first one, these are probably the ones, well, I don't think there's really a whole lot to talk about with Milton, but we'll get into, I feel like this is where the most heated conversation is going to occur, is in these next 2. So, Milton, they make repeated references throughout the game to your brother vanishing. Like, they say that, he didn't die, he went missing. And his vignette is just a flip book. And you go through the flip book, and I forget what the flip book has a name, a title, but I forget what it is.
Is it like something about the paintbrush? He has like a magic paintbrush.
The magic paintbrush, I think, is actually the name of it.
Something like that, anyway.
Right. So, this character has vanished. You don't find him anywhere. They've never found a body. And then his vignette is a flip book of him painting a door and then disappear. Fine.
Wait, after all this lead up, I thought you were about to present a game theory about his eventual result.
There's just an answer.
And I hate it.
See, I like it, but only after knowing it. Like, I wish there was an explanation in the game.
I wish it was not in the game. I think I really dislike this for 2 reasons.
Okay, I guess we should state it first.
Yeah, because I don't actually know what you're talking about.
Okay, so the developer,
Giant Sparrow,
made another game called The Unfinished Swan.
I know about that.
Okay, and basically Milton is like the character in that game. Like, he actually disappeared into one of his pieces of art.
Oh, what?
Thank you. It sucks.
It totally sucks.
Yeah.
Why? Is without the context of this game, is the Unfinished Swan presented in such a way that suggests what you're seeing on screen is metaphorical or not literal?
I haven't played it.
My understanding is maybe on that one. I don't, as far as I know, the Unfinished Swan does not have like a definitive, like, canonical narrative. It's like more of it's a really abstract game that consists of you like throwing globs of paint at objects to uncover them.
Yeah, I know the mechanics.
Right.
It was very famous for its mechanics.
But in no way is it alluded to that your main character might be a missing Swedish boy. Like, that is not a thing that...
Yeah, I guess... I like the concept of linking the projects. Like, I think that's like a appealing idea to a human who wants to make connections between similar things. But I do agree that it doesn't fit in this game because, like, you kind of go in thinking there might be something supernatural, but in the end there really isn't, and this just fucking is. But I mean, it might just be like, I think you got to take what they said about it kind of with a grain of salt. Maybe I feel like they probably didn't literally mean that that's exactly what happened,
right.
But it's like an Easter egg, like all this theoretically is a link between these games.
It's so dumb
wink.
It's so dumb as an Easter egg, though. Like, it feels like there would be like a sequence where at the end of the Shawshank Redemption, they like set up a connection to like the first Alien movie or something, like where there's just no tone continuity between the two works. That neither of them is actually improved by being connected to the other thing. Arguably, I think Edith Finch loses something by the suggestion that like, oh, magic is real. Actually,
right. I think it loses something, but at the same time, if you don't know about it, I think it's fine. Up until I found out about it, I thought this was great.
I don't think it's supposed to actually be like a canon explanation.
Yeah. My headcanon is that he fell off the roof and was eaten by an alligator. Like, because that would be, to me, the best possible. Yeah. They didn't find the body because he'd already been eaten by a wild animal.
Whatever happens to your mom's husband? My like best guess when you guys were speculating before there, when I was like at my most hype of curiosity, was like, oh man, did her husband leave her and take the kids and she couldn't handle it or something like that? But what happens to Indian guy?
Why do I not remember his name? Sanjay?
Do you get? Do you get an explanation?
I don't think you do.
They divorce. I don't know if there's a reason given.
Yeah, okay. I don't think so either.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Which is weird, considering that would be the person who the journal is for is just direct grandfather. So it seems like you would want to pass that information along, but or there was an explanation. It just wasn't anything that was like eye-opening in a way that makes you remember it.
They might have wanted to just keep it focused on like the immediate family and decided not to flesh out that character at all.
Don't forget about the little leaf people on the tree.
Yeah, the people who don't get a drawing. But yeah, so that's Milton. I honestly, I really like the flip book. I like the concept of it. I like actually watching it. It was cute and fun and had... and was mysterious until it wasn't mysterious and then I didn't like it anymore.
Yeah, it almost kind of feels like it's an excuse to have one less actual vignette designed and programmed. It's let's link it to the other game and use that as an explanation.
God, greedy dev, lazy dev.
Lazy dev. But, whatever.
Yeah. So now we're in Weed Bro's room. I'm just going to skip walking up the stairs. That part sucked.
The cool part.
The worst part of the game was was going part way up a flight of stairs and then going, oh man, now you gotta turn around. I like this game. What can I say? Going back around the other side, you go into the room. So this is Lewis's room. And Lewis is your brother and presumably the character in this game that you were actually the closest with who was not your mom or Edie.
Now, the reason I said earlier that I think this specific vignette is the one that is most amenable to being taken out of context, my evidence of that is not just personal argument, but I think it's descriptive. Most of the coverage about this game when it first came out was about this sequence. And the reason is because it's a gut punch designed specifically for people who play a lot of video games. It's supposed to be a kind of alienated feeling that's really powerful to a lot of people in this day and age. I mean, it worked on me to a certain extent, and it got a huge amount of press coverage, and I think it was pretty deserving of that. It was probably my favorite vignette, and I didn't expect it to be, because when I heard the description, I thought it sounded like the kind of thing that might be trying a little bit too hard, but they executed on it very well, and I am very positive on the sequence.
Yeah, it's something that not only just appeals to people who play a lot of games, but I think it feels especially relevant to our generation even, I think. That the notion of how Lewis grew up in like this family with like all these like crazy stories, and
Right.
he just works at like a cannery and feels like he like wants something more out of life, like he was promised something more.
Right. Yeah, Lewis.
That's like very relatable.
Yeah, they go out of their way sort of to tell you, even to the point of the narrator of his vignette being his psychiatrist, to basically tell you like there's nothing wrong with Lewis. Like Lewis is, for all intents and purposes, for the majority of his life, a normal, of average everything type of guy, and through really no fault of his own, ends up being like more or less like a failure. Like he's unable to like make any inways in like the job market. He is surrounded by people who he feels like who don't understand him, and because of that, this like whole thing that they've set up where he develops this like weird personality quirk where he has to envision a game to keep himself like occupied at work, it's what makes this tragic, I think, is the fact that he basically is like deteriorated over the course of the thing. So it's the whole concept of his segment basically is that it is basically impossible, and actually the reason why I disagree that this is the one that works the best out of context, because if you played this out of context, it would seem like the point is, isn't it hard to focus on doing two things simultaneously? But in the context of the game, it's more of an exploration of the character.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that, where if you played this out of context, I think that would put a greater focus on that like mechanical like pulling in two directions and being like, oh, he's gonna hurt himself because he's distracted.
Mm. Is it clear at the end, by the way, whether what happened to Lewis was an accident or if it was intentional suicide?
Oh, I think it's pretty clearly suicide to me.
I would agree.
I think it is too, but it does feel a little blurred because he's like, what you're seeing or you're playing is he's purely in fantasy mode when it happens.
Right.
So it's hard to know if he was like 100% in on killing himself. When
because the last thing is you're being crowned like king of the goddamn universe. Mm-hmm. And that's when and I don't know, maybe this was a scale thing for me. My one nitpick is that I don't think that the fish guillotine is large enough to actually kill someone.
Whatever.
It's large enough for you to put your head into.
I would say if it's large enough to put your head into, it's probably large enough to kill you. It would not be a pretty or clean death, I can tell you that.
No, it would not.
Pneumatics, this is not the element that I wanted to focus on.
No, rightfully so, this is not the element anyone focused on. Breaking new ground, NOCLIP podcast, fish guillotine discussion.
Yeah, it's very clear that he killed himself for a bunch of reasons. First, it's why the psychologist in the letter that you're...
Psychiatrist.
Yes, sorry. It's why the psychiatrist in the letter that you're reading is discussing the incident in a way that suggests that she's taking responsibility for what happened.
Right.
It's because she feels like this was an outcome that she failed to prevent, which implies intent. Like, there was no way she could have prevented a work accident.
Right.
But she could have prevented a man from sticking his head in a guillotine because he thought that his personal body no longer had meaning to who he truly was,
right,
and that only his free existent mind is the truly thing that could have ever existed. Like, he developed a psychosis, and the psychosis led him to believe that he literally didn't need his body to live. He was wrong, as even the vignette proves, because it ends pretty abruptly at that point. But that is the illness that progressed in this alienated guy. And actually, you said earlier that you suggested that it wasn't through any fault of his own that he got disenfranchised. I disagree. I think there are details in the room that point to him having some kind of psychological issue long before the fantasy begins to take control. He's a lot of the tapes and like books and shit in his room, they're conspiracy theories. They're like crazy person stuff. And we all know people who are on weed, they're terrible people that really are
on
all
weed.
they're hooked on weed. That's what
Yeah,
it
they're
is.
hooked on- That's sticky icky.
They're really just the scum of society. And so I feel like the image that's being painted is that there's always been something with this kid, even from his youngest days, that alienated him in one way or the other. It made it harder for him to relate to the people around him. He was always treated, even like in high school by members of his family, as someone to avoid, as a problem. And in his isolation, that problem festered into a psychosis that cost him his own life.
Do you know how old he was when he died?
Not precisely, but
I know that he dies in 2010. I didn't take a birth date down.
I feel like he's in his 20s.
yeah.
Okay, because I was kind of under the impression he was right out of high school, and I thought a lot of the reason that they told people to avoid him was because he picked up a lot of the old weed smoking.
Well, that too.
Because I didn't notice at like the books, right? Like the things that you notice when you go in directly are your, we need to get across to people that this guy smokes weed. He's got like a bowl on his shelf and like tie-dye shit on the walls. And I'm pretty sure he has like a poster that just says legalize marijuana, which is the most like weirdly specific.
He was 22.
Oh, he was 22 when he died. So that gives him a little bit more time. But yeah, I did not know, like, to me, the conspiracy theory thing is sort of like if that's the key to it, that's the only one they put there. Because I didn't notice that, but I didn't, like, other than that, he just seemed like the, like, slacker stoner guy.
He had the
archetype.
psychiatrist before he started doing these crazy visualizations.
Sure.
It happened in that order, which implies that there was a problem beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's also implied that his mom got him the job, like, to give him like a normal, like, sense of like belonging. Like you can contribute to society by doing this job I got you.
Yeah.
It's implying that there was like something.
Preventing him.
Some pre-existing issue. But I do kind of agree that there isn't a lot to go on there.
Yeah.
Or at least I didn't pick up on too much.
Right. I feel like if you look at it either from the, like, mental illness angle or just the, like, on way, gone wild, like, way of looking at it, where he was just so fucking, like, did not care about anything for so long that he just developed a psychosis. Like, it wasn't something that was pre-existing, it was something that was developed. I think either way, the primary, like, the elements of his vignette that still succeed in either.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
either reading.
The isolation and the, like, specific, like, capitalist environment alienation that makes the psychosis worse, and that's true in both halves of the narrative.
Right.
And it's equally sad both times.
And it's the monotony as well, like, is part of it, and that's why it's so difficult to sort of, like, focus on the fish when it comes through.
The fish becomes annoying, which is, like, so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if how like interesting it would be to like actually describe the mechanics, but I do want to give a shout out to them because I feel like the way this is executed, even if you got rid of all the story, this would still be interesting to play. Because like the way it works is that the fish comes in from the left, and you have to like grab it with the right hand, put it under a guillotine, and throw the body of the fish onto a conveyor belt or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it gradually creeps in like this daydream that you have to control on the other stick, and you like it progresses from like navigating a maze to like having to like make simple choices to like this path or that path. And the visuals change, and like the amount of space on the screen it takes up like expands slowly as well. And And it just keeps going further than you expect, to the point where it's like a full 3D thing that's taking up the whole screen, and the fish just kind of like plops in.
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's a reason why this is what everybody talks about the game. It's just so well done.
Yeah, I have a particular affinity for the couple of times where the fish shows up as an
in the
in-game
fantasy.
Yeah.
It's like barring the door, and then you chops it and it busts.
Yeah.
So good.
Fishbuster was the original name. It was What Remains of Fishbuster 2000.
It gave me those specific sequences where the fish was incorporated as like a physical object and not just as a motif. Really reminded me very strongly of being a kid and doing the mental guardrail surfing thing in the back of a car. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. 'Cause we've
Thank
talked
you.
about this before.
Oh, good.
If you don't know exactly what we're talking about immediately, you probably didn't do this.
Yeah, it's fair.
No, I was actually lab grown and came into existence at age 19.
It's like when you were a kid, you were riding in a car down the highway, and you're looking out the window, and you're imagining yourself grinding on it with a skateboard.
Yes. What? This is universal enough that we both did it before we ever met each other.
Or you have a really long sword and you're cutting down all the trees.
Yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Yes,
Something about the motion of the car, it kind of gives you this feeling of sliding across it. It's a mental thing.
This is where the
It's
Sonic
common.
the Hedgehog rail segments came from. Because I never actually played a 3D Sonic game until I was close to an adult.
Yeah.
So it absolutely worked in that direction. There was an innate rail grinding part of the human brain that we all tap into at some point.
All right.
But yeah, this is a thing that other people do as well.
Sure.
There's probably a subreddit for it.
Yeah. I'm familiar with the concept of grinding. No.
What is this grind?
This is grind. Yeah. I'm familiar with the concept of putting not real wrappings over real things in order to
Are you describing imagination in the most obtuse way possible?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
As just a thing that kids do. Because I don't want to say imagination by itself, because as an adult I feel I still have an imagination and am capable of thinking about things that don't exist.
But what's important is the connection to real world objects.
Right, that I think that is particularly but I'm sorry, I'm just in the car most of the time this was not what I was doing.
The best way I can describe it is it kind of evokes this feeling. It's purely in your head though, which makes it hard to explain. Of walking and just running your hand on the wall or something. It kind of gives you this feeling of sliding across something.
Yeah.
All right.
It's like grinding on a wall.
Yeah, it's like grinding.
It's like grinding.
It's grinding on a sick round.
Next time we're gonna be talking about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. No, I got you guys. So that's all of them. Those are the vignettes.
They really end on a high note.
Yeah.
They really do, because the last section of this game is basically your vignette, which is more of a flashback than anything else. Because the last thing you see is this dinner sequence between you, your mom, and Edie, and she's being apparently uncharacteristically silent. You go through this whole thing, and basically she says that she's not leaving. It's alluded to earlier. There was a hurricane, and she was like, "Fuck you, I'm not going."
And this is right after Lewis died as well.
And then you go through. You do have this one sequence where you walk toward the old house as Edie.
Yeah, Edie has left a journal or storybook or whatever for young Edie, who you've played as, and you're dismissed from the table, and you go through yet another secret passage into a secret library, and find the book, and you start reading it.
Right.
And that's where you play the sequence where there was an earthquake.
Right.
That made the tide go way, way out, so you can walk over to the cool red light blinky house.
Right. And so you walk there, but before you ever get there, your mom interrupts it. They pack you into a car and you leave, and that's sort of where the game leaves off. It says, Edie didn't want to tell everybody this story. Or my mom didn't want anyone to tell me these stories because this is what is perpetuating the curse.
Yeah.
And then that's sort of what it ends on. And you know that Edith herself died before any of this ever happened, like any of the things that you'd be reading. So
Mom didn't want you to know about the Kraken.
Mom didn't want you to know about the Kraken.
Secret Kraken.
Yeah, so hopefully he doesn't go to the house because obviously he'll be in with the Kraken. Thank you for listening to NOCLIP. But how many times can I do that joke?
At the billion.
1 million times.
It's just gonna become like a normal part of the episode.
Yeah, the false ending.
Yes. So you start out the game as Edith's son, reading the journal.
Right.
Then it cuts to you as Edith going to the house to write the journal.
Yep.
You play through all of that, figuring out all the deaths, writing them in, filling out the family tree. Then cut to a flashback of Edith's childhood. Then cut back to where we were in the house as Edith, where she goes up to write her own journal entry in her bed. Then cut to the birth scene. Then cut to her son showing up to the house, to her grave.
Right.
It's lots of layers.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
If you
You really have to go back through and think about.
If you laid out the game's timeline on like a linear scale and then drew connections between them, you would end up with like Beethoven's Fifth or something like scribbled out.
It's a secret code.
Yeah.
It's actually Zelda's Lullaby backwards.
Yeah.
If you twist it 90 degrees, it forms one of those like string finger game Eiffel Towers that they make.
Yeah.
Do those things does that game have a name? I assume it's one of the things that's finally
really a
died with the
game?
internet.
I said, "Oh yeah." I have no idea what you're talking about. That was a lie.
You can or something. You can take like strings and like between your fingers and do them in a certain way, and then you look at them at a certain angle. It looks like stuff.
It's like the less popular version of marbles. Like it's like below marbles on the old person entertainment scale.
Yeah, it's like not really a game. It's just kind of like a trick you can do.
It's a way to trick your brain into believing that you're having fun.
The tangents never end. So I think we should go into final thoughts here. And go ahead. Hey!
Smooth, very smooth. Short, powerful, kind of surprisingly so. Probably the most polished walking simulator I've ever played.
Yeah.
In terms of the amount of detail put into pretty much every individual interaction and every feature of the environment. I would probably use this as the game that I would show off to people to convince them that walking simulators are good and worth their time for a bunch of different reasons. So yeah, can't complain. As I alluded to at the very start of this whole terrible podcasting ordeal, I feel like the end message isn't. It's a game about life, and life has no clear starts and stops, and there's no end to the journey of a family tree, and so the game doesn't really try to do that, and it breaks some of your expectations about what you want from a tightly written narrative. But I think it's mostly still to the game's favor. Like, like B+, 89 out of 100 IGN, replayability value pretty low.
They get those achievements.
Yeah.
I think, I agree with a lot of that. Andy and I are a particular breed in that we both enjoy walking simulators as a thing. And this ends up being, probably actually my favorite one. There's some other games that are in close contention that I'm sure that if we sat down, we could name a few and they would all be correct. But for the most part, I think that this is also a game that non-walking simulator fans could play and also enjoy. And I think it's probably kind of what they were going for. But the other thing is we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about the fucked up shit that we read when we were kids, like that we were made to read as part of a school curriculum. Talking about like where the red fern grows and what something.
Oh, hold on, the scarlet ibis. No. What was it? Flowers for Algernon.
Flowers for Algernon and that kind of thing. So, and this feels almost like sort of the video game version of that, and yet it seems to have more of a redemption than those books did. The ones that you were forced to read when you were 12 years old to basically teach you about life and death. This game, I think, does a better job of it, because it shows the horrible death of a dozen people, and at the end of it, you feel sort of like you want to live life for life. And I think that's kind of what they were going for, and that's the strength of its narrative.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what you guys said. I agree 100%. This feels like the most polished walking simulator I've ever played. And I think a lot of that goes back to what I got at earlier, where while walking simulators are a genre that's mostly, if not all, produced by indie studios. And this really doesn't feel like an indie effort. It really feels like it has that extra, like, level of care and thought and, production value. And it puts it up there, I think, as the best walking simulator. It's, like, in that league with Vanishing of Ethan Carter and, like, Gone Home in my book.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because, also, like I was saying earlier, like, a lot of these games like to put in puzzles or gamier elements, or, like, they feel like they need to, like, have more substantial, like, gameplay, air quotes. But this game does, like, the, I think, ideal spin on that, where it has these vignettes, as we've called them, these little set pieces, but they all are in service of the narrative that's happening. They don't get in the way of the pacing. This game is like 3 hours tops, probably closer to 2.
Right.
Depending on how thoroughly you look at everything. It just nails that pacing, and it never has any lulls. It's just very well executed.
We went a ton longer on this than I thought we were going to. So thank you for listening to all of NOCLIP this week.
What are we talking about next time?
I cannot fucking believe I'm actually saying it, but next time we're going to be talking about Persona 5.
It has come!
We've already put a collective multiple work weeks into playing this game, and that will all come to fruition next time that we speak in early December. Until that time, if you want to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on noclippodcast.com and the newly renewed splattershot.pro. We got it for one more year, boys. Nintendo, come take it from me. I will take almost any payment for it.
Don't even cast that check. Just put it on the wall. If you can force Nintendo to give you money for anything, man.
They have like a Mario checkbook. It's like a nice little novelty Mario check.
To convince people not to cash them.
Yeah. It's been signed by Miyamoto himself.
On this that wonderful website, you can find all of our old episodes, links to our Twitter, YouTube, if you're like a YouTube podcast guy, you fucking weirdo.
Jesus.
That's what I got. Thanks for everybody for listening.
Good job, weirdos.
I got nothing.
Good, we're good. Don't forget to leave us a rating and review on iTunes, and
smash that like button.
Smash the old like button. We've got like glue and shit and tape that we keep with us to keep putting that like button back together. So don't worry.
Just don't worry about smashing it.
No resource cost to us smashing that like button.
Just like Walter, you can smash that with the sledgehammer.
Who's Walter?
He's
the one who lived in the basement.
The name. I thought there was just like a smash Walter.
Walter the Hammer Man.
I thought it was like, you've got my mind in like a 40s era toy space.
Okay.
So I thought like, oh, here's Stretch Armstrong. Now try Smash Walter.
Yeah, I actually love that. Stretch Armstrong is the name, and it describes what he does. Smash Walter. Like he smashes a wall, so he Smash Walter.
Smash Walter.
Just a lead figurine.
It's a figurine that has like a spring loaded arm.
You know, Flash Gordon, Smash Walter.
Smash Walter. Stretch Armstrong. Gumby.
Really strangely aggressive for children's programming of that era. Just kind of Kool-Aid manned his way into all these situations. A grin on his face, blood on his teeth.